Happy New Year, everyone. It's so good to be back in video mode, or I should say music mode, because I'm not in the same space I used to be in. I moved to a new place, and I feel like I'm better oriented towards my goals for what I want to do with this business. I have a whole studio designated for Atmos, a whole studio designated for drums, and maybe some other types of recording. Needless to say, I have a lot of space, and I'm so happy. I'm so excited. And behind me, I actually have a whiteboard that's covering up the window because it was a little bit too bright. And on that whiteboard, I have a bunch of goals that I cannot wait to get done for 2025. And at the end of this video, I want to show you how you can get your goals situated, especially with this upcoming year coming around. So stick with me to the end here. But in the meantime, let me show you something in Logic. And just for the record, this song is not mixed. But there's a reason for that. I came up with this song about a week or two ago, and I've just been building off of it and adding a bunch of layers that I think I'll like whenever I go to mix it. And something kind of caught my ears whenever I was listening back in my Atmos studio compared to my producer studio. Because in my producer studio, I don't have the ability to listen to anything from like 50 hertz and below accurately. In my Atmos studio, I got two huge 12-inch subwoofers, a three-way Kali audio system for my surrounds, and right now they're my main left and right. And there's just so much extra I can hear now. And if you can't hear from the microphone, I also don't have acoustic treatment. So I'm still not listening in the most accurate way possible. But I've done this before, and that's why it was so easy to point out this issue in my potential mix, and I want to be able to show you guys how to address it. I forgot to mention, it's probably wise to have a good enough system in your listening environment. If you have speakers that can reach that low or a pair of headphones, I would highly suggest listening to this entire video with headphones. First things first, let's just get an idea of what the song sounds like. So that's the gist of the song. One of the first things I did whenever I first started producing this song was what is called a sidechain compression. And I know there's a million videos on the subject, but I think it's worth mentioning because that's something I've already taken into account before actually mixing. So if I go to my bass, I have it labeled as bass, and oh shoot, man, this is such an unorganized project. Don't do this. If you're gonna produce a song, label your tracks. But for now, I just didn't make time for it. So if we take a listen to our bass, there's a little bit of sidechain compression there. And basically what that's being triggered by is it's not being triggered by a kick drum, it's actually being triggered by a separate sidechain, which is something that I do want to point out. If you're going to go about creating a very clean sidechain compression and you want to have the most control over it, don't use the kick drum for the sidechain compression. It's a good starting point, but a better way is to get some kind of click, especially like a MIDI or a click track, you have so much better control over how much you want your attack to be and your release. So what I did in this case is I just created a designated Klopfgeist, which is the click track sampler used. Let me pull it up here. This is literally all it is. So if I play something on my MIDI keyboard, well, it's not going to play because it's muted. Oh, I soloed my bass. Of course! So I'm gonna solo the bass and the click track, or the MIDI track. I have a pitched click sound, and I can modify the dampening and the tonality. So if I want it to be more tonal, or if I want it to be less tonal, I can adjust that from here. But if you can't do something like this, I would just find some kind of click sample in whatever sampler you're using in your production and use that. What I did in my compressor for the bass was I sidechained instrument 4, which was the SoCal kit. What I would much rather do is, if I can find it, be instrument sidechain. I have it labeled as SC. I would label it as sidechain. That's probably a better idea. So now whenever I hit play, or let's mute the original sidechain, and if I listen, I got this filter here on my compressor. I hit the button listen, which means it's gonna play back whatever it is that my compressor is sidechaining to. I can adjust my threshold and then it'll accommodate to that. And the beauty of it, with it being such a quick sound, that I can adjust my release to the timing of the song, and in which I already have the MIDI notes set to quarter notes. I already have I already have the MIDI notes set to, actually they're eighth notes with the tempo being 180, or not eighth notes, half notes. Jesus. I can already understand how quick and how slow I want my release to be. And I want that release to just stop at 0 by the time the next measure or the next beat comes around. And I'm gonna get rid of this over here. If I solo my kick, or if I solo my drum kit, you'll kind of hear what I'm talking about. Hear that sidechain click is following the kick and snare on my drummer track. So now with that said, I'm gonna turn off this filter and I'm just gonna hit on. And remember, you can adjust the frequency of this, so that might also help a lot. Your ratio will help a lot with this. So if you don't want it to be as aggressive, you can lower that threshold. But in this scenario, I'm just being creative. But in a mixing scenario, you wanna adjust that accordingly. We're gonna click on the on button, which means that sidechain filter is now going to be applied to that sidechain. I'm gonna take out the drums. This is the before the sidechain compression. Sorry, before. I have automation on this. That's cool. So if you don't want the sidechain compression to be on at a certain time, you can bypass the compressor altogether, so you don't have any sidechain compression, which is what I did. I'll have to remember that's off, so I'm gonna turn that off, bring my compressor back. Now I have control. So you see nothing's happening because it's not only just not receiving any signal, but it's not ducking that bass signal. And I know there's a little bit of noise in my bass, so whenever I activate this sidechain compressor, it's gonna be really noticeable. So I'm gonna leave it off and then I'm gonna turn it on in the middle of the track. Wow, and it gives that pumping kind of effect, and now it's in time with that release. So by the time the release comes back, you have that bass tone. And I'm actually gonna lower it a little bit because I don't want it to hold out. Most of the time, if you're going for a special sidechain effect with something, you want the release to be in time with your song. With this, I'm just kind of moving the bass quick enough to allow for other instruments to take priority. Let's say the kick drum. So I'm going to get rid of automation. I'm gonna go back to my drums and solo just both of those together, because those will usually be the culprit. Instead of maybe carving out the bass to accommodate for the kick, maybe you just wanna duck the bass temporarily until throughout the drums section, or maybe throughout an entire song. It would be less of a creative decision and more of a mixed decision. Nonetheless, it's still important. So we're gonna take off the compressor and hear what it sounds like without sidechain compression. And that drummer is a lot louder than the bass anyways. But let's see what happens whenever I add this sidechain compression and have the bass duck in time with the drums. The punch in that kick drum is just tremendous. And it's not just adding more oomph, it's adding more thump to the snare drum. So I'll do before and after. And it just lets the drums kind of be pushed up a few dB. And if you want to make it even more subtle than that, lower your release time. I like to have the attack kind of high, but not immediately snappy, because then you'll get this kind of weird effect, like a clicky compressor. Yeah, there's a few clicks and pops that just don't work well. I wish there was some kind of look ahead thing, and there probably is some kind of feature for that. And other compressors may opt for that look ahead for sidechaining. I'm not too worried about it. This is just a basic mix idea. So I'm gonna leave it at 3 milliseconds, and I'm just gonna keep my release super low. And I'm gonna solo those drums again. It's getting out of the way just enough to improve your overall sound in your low end without sounding like it's doing anything at all. It's so freaking cool. And I'll even do you one better and pull up this EQ and let you listen to that low end and kind of maybe better understand what I'm talking about. This is with off. And on. And off. All right, this video is getting a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. So let's move on to the next thing. What most people tend to do is solo your instruments to find the culprit of your issue. And let me ask you something. If that is you out there, if you haven't heard of frequency masking and phase relationships, you need to go check out a video for that. And I might make another video later on about that, but for now, if you don't know about that, once you're done with this video, check out phase relationships and frequency masking. And maybe somebody else out there can do a better example of explaining this. The essential is frequencies are overlapping each other in a way that is not cohesive, and it doesn't sound like all of the instruments are playing with each other. Like what we did with the drummer and the bass. Put the drummer in front of the bass, but even when we tried to do that, there was still some masking that was causing issues, not getting us the full sound of the drummer. What we did is we ducked that bass out of the way temporarily, just so we would have less issues in masking. And it sounded like it brought up our drummer another like 2-3 dB, at least for me it does, without actually having to change the tonality of the bass instruments. But we can't do that with every track. We can't just sidechain any effect that has low end in it and call it good, because even the synths that I have that reach that low end can cause masking with my electric bass that I showed you just a second ago. So one thing that I like to do whenever I'm trying to understand my low end a little better is, like with this channel EQ, I have a filter and I move it to about 120 hertz or 80 to 150, just so I can only hear what's going on in that frequency range. And you can do this with any frequency range. So if you hear masking, or maybe something's kind of poking out that you don't really understand, try soloing frequencies. At least at that point, you'll better understand what's causing the issues in your mix. So with this in mind, let's just solo our low end and see what exactly is going on. I don't know if you guys heard that, but in that third chord progression, essentially the second phrase of this first intro part, whatever you want to call it, I don't care what's called. The song's not done anyways. So I'm gonna solo right before this phrase right here. Oh, it's so warbly. There's so much going on that doesn't need to be there. So what I'm gonna do, I've already kind of done this, so I already know what the culprit is, but I'm just gonna go through and solo some tracks and show you what exactly I'm doing to solve this issue. So when I hear this, I hear some low frequencies. So if I go in and start soloing stuff, let's say the synth stack, that's got a little bit of low end. Solo the bass. Okay, I hear conflict of interest there, so maybe it's the bass issue. Well, let's add the kit. Let's add the drum kit. Maybe it's the guitars. The problem with soloing is that you have so many elements in your song that could be causing issues. When you mute stuff, it helps you understand the context of your mix and which specific instruments are causing the issue. Because even though you solo all these 4 different instruments, there could be more culprits in the song that you don't know about. So let's take a gander. Whoa, already the first try, synth stack. So I'm just gonna try the bass. Maybe mute the kit. So let's go to the synth stack. Let's mute the bass instead. See, when I do that, whether or not I solo the synth or the bass, it sounds fine. So what's happened is I've muted both of these tracks, and I hear that they're 2 different tones. They're 2 different notes altogether. So let's mute the synth stack. I can't go that low. So it jumps up to that next note. What the synth stack does instead, it actually goes back to the octave that it was originally when I wrote the song, which is something I didn't catch in my other monitors because my monitors don't reach that low. So I'm just gonna go through, I'm gonna get rid of this EQ. I'm gonna find some consistencies. So this is the bass it's trying to replicate. That's not the right note. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move it to the right note. Right. Now it's the same note that the traditional bass is in. And what I would actually do and recommend, any kind of bass sounds, put them in a folder together so you can kind of understand what's going on. And I actually made it a little more mono in the panner here. So now let's go to that kick and the drums again. Smooth as butter, or at least better butter than what we started with. So now let's go back, unsolo everything, and I'm just gonna play the before and after. I should have kept, I'm gonna do this, duplicate that, but this one was actually the same as the first one, because what I did when I was writing the song, I was just copy and pasting and just seeing what would stick to the wall. So here's our original. Actually, we're gonna take off this channel EQ. And now the fixed version. Smooth like butter, and I can't believe it's not butter because it's so smooth. So let's enable that channel EQ and see if there are any other issues. So there's a synth right here that I knew was a lower octave. I have these two synths. This was actually what the song started out as, was just these two synths. You can kind of hear that sidechain compression as well there. But again, with smaller monitors, it's harder to tell what's going on with this synth here. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm gonna solo the low end again. Let's do that. And see what happens whenever I mute this instrument. It's so subtle, but it adds a little bit of mud to the portion of the low end that I just want to keep clean, with the kick drum, a little bit of the beef in the snare drum, and the bass. This is more of a lead tone. So what I'm going to do is I actually have an EQ that's already rolled off some of the lows, and I'm just going to move that up. Simple as that. It's as simple as it can get. And I'm going to keep soloing the low end while I do this, so I know at the point that I get rid of it in the EQ that I no longer have to go further up. If I soloed this and then tried to EQ it, or maybe soloed the instruments, it might not help me understand the bigger picture still. Now, if we take a listen to what we've actually done to the synth, I'm going to take off this soloed low end, and just hear what I've done. And the before. Ooh, ooh. It's just a subtle amount of low end to cause it to not sound like butter. You know what butter sounds like, right? That's what it should not be sounding like. It sounds like gross butter. This is margarine. We're looking for butter. Margarine's okay in certain instances, but it's just too much. So now if I play it again and then bring it back up to where I had it, in the context of the mix, you're not gonna miss that. You're not gonna miss a total of about 180 decibels difference. Decibels, oh my gosh. 180 hertz in difference between the low end. Yes, it takes up more real estate, but in the context that we're looking into with the low end, I just want kick, bass. That's it. When you got a kind of a lead part way in the background like this, it makes it a little less relevant. So now let's take a look with the low end soloed, the before and after. This is the before. And this is the after. Especially on that first note, and the third note between phrases, or chord I should say. This is the before, after. And on that third phrase is what it sounds like. Yeah, especially on that note. And after leaves so much more room for our desired effect. Let's do a context mix. This is before. And the after. Beautiful. All right, so my camera just died because it overheated, which I thought I turned that setting off, but I haven't had this camera running in forever, so who knows? With all of this being said, I don't expect you to go through each section of frequencies trying to figure out this issue. The reason I soloed them in the first place was to better understand why I was hearing what I was hearing. So if an issue comes up and you're having a hard time figuring out and pinpointing it in the mix, start muting stuff first. And if you still can't figure it out, solo your frequency bands, then start muting stuff, because it's easier to focus on a few smaller details in a finer resolution than the overall picture in a finer resolution, if that makes sense. And for those that stuck around to the end of the video to learn how to figure out their goals better for 2025, I highly recommend checking out this video where I talk about my own personal goals and why it's important to figure out how to set your own goals, and go check it out. I'm also still doing a giveaway on February 4th, I think I'm doing it. And you'll find all the information on how to get entered in that video. Thanks for stopping by. I hope to see you in the next video.